The classroom buzzed with the low hum of adolescent chatter, a sound as familiar to Mrs. Lockhart as the scraping of chalk on the board, or the routine click of her heels against the tile floor at Roosevelt Academy, a private institution tucked in the quieter corners of suburban Virginia. The air was perpetually stiff with privilege, subtle entitlement stitched into every blazer, every polished shoe, every side glance. The students' daughters and sons of attorneys, investors, diplomats, and media moguls carried themselves with the brash confidence of those born into influence. They debated global policies before lunch and bragged about Ivy League legacies before homeroom. It was within this carefully managed environment that Tamia Crockett, a soft-spoken, wide-eyed 10th grader with a sharp mind and a name known by only a few in that space, found herself seated near the back of room 214, her spiral notebook clutched like armor against the ridicule she could already sense brewing. That morning, Mrs. Lockhart had announced a project, a mock congressional hearing where each student would assume the role of a representative and deliver a passionate argument on a bill of their choosing. For most, it was a gay man exercise. In debate, to flex rhetorical muscles groomed in country club conversations and elite debate leagues. But for Tamia, it meant more. When Mrs. Lockhart began asking each student to share who inspired their political interest, the room filled with expected names: Abraham Lincoln, Barack Obama, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, even Elon Musk, which prompted a few chuckles. Then came Tamia's turn. With a quiet breath and her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My mom inspires me. She's in Congress." A hush fell. At first no one spoke. Then came the unmistakable sound of Mrs. Lockhart's scofflight, restrained but undeniable. The kind of scoff that wasn't just doubt, it was dismissal. "Oh, sweetie," she said with a smile laced in condescension. "We're all dreaming big today, aren't we?" The class erupted with laughter. Not cruel exactly, at least not in the overt, aggressive way that marked other schools, but sharp, mocking in that passive-aggressive way only the rich can master. Tamia shrank into her chair, the warmth rising to her cheeks not from shame, but from rage she didn't yet know how to release. The room moved on. Mrs. Lockhart didn't ask for clarification, didn't press further. In her eyes, it was simply implausible that someone like Tamia, who wore second-hand sneakers and didn't have a last name with political gravity, could be telling the truth. The rest of the day dragged. Whispers followed her in the hallway. Someone sarcastically asked if she had any capital secrets to share. Another mimicked a congressional roll call and yelled out, "Crockett absent, due to imagination." And through it all, Tamia held her silence like a shield, her fingers drumming against her notebook, biding time. The bell rang for dismissal, and Tamia walked home alone as always, cutting through the park rather than taking the long sidewalk around, because that's how her mother taught her to take the direct path. To avoid detours, to move through life with unshakable purpose. At home, their apartment was modest. A third-floor unit in a low-rise complex just outside D.C., the walls bore few decorations. Save for one prominent photo that sat framed on the mantel, her mother, Jasmine Crockett, being sworn in on the house floor, her right hand raised, her expression serious and defiant. It was not a photo easily found online. Jasmine didn't flaunt it, didn't print it on campaign banners, didn't need the spotlight to validate her worth. She had always told Tamia, the real ones don't need to be seen. They need to be felt. That night, Tamia didn't cry. She simply sat at the kitchen table, opened her notebook, and began writing. Her project would not be some theoretical bill based on abstract ideas. It would be a full-scale argument about real legislation her mother had fought for: criminal justice reform and the protection of marginalized voices. Her presentation would be precise, passionate, and bulletproof. Because she knew the only way to silence people like Mrs. Lockhart was not to confront them with emotion, but with undeniable, uncomfortable truth. The next day, as she rehearsed her opening statement in front of her mom, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, arms folded, eyes narrowed with pride. "You sure you want to drop this in that class?" she asked, not teasing, but warning. Tamia nodded. "They don't believe me. I want them to know." Jasmine smiled then. Not the politician's smile she reserved for press conferences or floor debates, but the smile of a mother who knew her daughter wasn't just ready for the world, she was ready to shake it. And Jasmine, always ready to support, but never to rescue, unless absolutely necessary, made a decision in that moment. She'd been planning to let Tamia handle it herself, but something in her daughter's voice told her this moment might demand more. So she made a few calls, cleared her schedule. 2 days later, at precisely 10:47 a.m. during the second round of student presentations, the door to room 214 opened with a soft creak that cut through the air like thunder. The class turned. Mrs. Lockhart froze mid-sentence. And there she was, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, in a sharp navy suit, her congressional pin gleaming, walking into that classroom with the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Tamia didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. Her truth had just walked in the door. Mrs. Lockhart's mouth parted slightly, though no words emerged. Just a faint intake of breath that sounded almost mechanical, like a faulty air vent gasping under pressure. The sight of Jasmine Crockett stepping into her meticulously organized classroom turned the atmosphere into something close to static. Every student, every sound, every twitch suspended in a moment of disbelief. The Congresswoman's reputation had always preceded her in Washington and beyond. But for this tight circle of adolescents and their comfortable, out-of-touch mentor, she was now an unexpected intrusion, raw, real, and unimpressed. Jasmine's gaze didn't linger on the teacher, but immediately found Tamia, whose eyes betrayed no surprise, only the kind of quiet intensity that comes from knowing you were right all along. Without waiting for an invitation, Jasmine crossed the room with that deliberate grace honed by courtrooms and congressional hearings alike. Her heels tapped out a rhythm more authoritative than any gavel. She stopped just beside her daughter's desk and turned to face the class, her presence exuding both warmth and warning. "I hear we're learning about Congress today," she said, her voice smooth but firm, tinged with the kind of sarcasm that makes the listener feel both chastised and humbled. A murmur of recognition swept across the room as several students finally connected the dots, the name, the face, the woman they'd only seen in clips, often edited and taken out of context by pundits who never quite knew how to digest her unapologetic presence. Jasmine was not just a congresswoman. She was that congresswoman, the one who made waves, who got under the skin of networks, who stood up not only when it was expected, but especially when it wasn't. Mrs. Lockhart attempted to regain her composure, drawing a shaky breath and offering a smile that barely disguised the panic behind her eyes. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, her voice brittle. "What a surprise. Well, I wasn't aware you were visiting today." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Neither was I, but Tamia, let me read over the class assignment. I thought it might be educational to make a brief appearance." The emphasis on educational was not lost on anyone. Several students exchanged nervous glances, the air thick with secondhand embarrassment. Tamia sat silently, her back straight, her hands folded calmly on her desk. Her peers, who had laughed just days before, were now transfixed, unsure whether to be impressed, ashamed, or both. Jasmine turned toward the teacher now, her expression steady but unsmiling. "I heard there was some confusion," she continued, "about whether my daughter was telling the truth, about who her mother is." Mrs. Lockhart opened her mouth, closed it again, then attempted a laugh, dry, strained, almost wheezy. "Oh, I'm sure it was just a little misunderstanding," she said. "Kids say the darndest things sometimes, and we encourage imagination, of course imagination." Jasmine interrupted, her tone colder now. "You mean like assuming a student is lying because she doesn't fit your stereotype of what a congressperson's child should look like?" The words landed like punches wrapped in velvet. Students collectively leaned back as if the force of accountability might strike them too. Mrs. Lockhart stammered, trying to salvage the moment, her hands fluttering uselessly in front of her, like a conductor whose orchestra had walked off stage. "Congresswoman, I assure you, I treat all my students with the utmost respect. Respect is not laughing at a student when they share a personal truth," Jasmine said, stepping forward. Respect is listening, believing, especially. When that truth challenges your assumptions, her gaze pierced the room, meeting the eyes of every student, letting the silence hang long enough to press the lesson deep into their consciousness. Then she turned and addressed the room. You all are learning about Congress, how laws are made, how power moves. Let me tell you something your textbooks won't. Real power doesn't always come in the package you expect. It doesn't wear just blue blazers and old money. Sometimes it walks in with braids and sneakers, and it tells you truths you're not ready to hear. My daughter is smarter than half the people I sit with on the house floor, and yet here, in a school, her mother's taxis help fund. She was ridiculed for daring to speak her truth. That's not education. That's indoctrination. The weight of her words sank in, deeper than any textbook ever could. Mrs. Lockhart looked like she wanted to crawl out of her own skin. She gave a weak nod and stepped aside, mumbling something about letting the Congresswoman take the floor. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her mere presence was the rebuttal, the proof, the fire that turned whispers into silence. She motioned for Tamia to come forward, and together, mother and daughter stood at the front of the class. Tamia opened her notebook and began her presentation, clear, composed, and commanding. She spoke about the Equal Justice Act, the school-to-prison pipeline, and the bills that often died before reaching debate because too many in power cared more about appearances than impact. The class listened, truly listened for the first time. There were no snickers, no eye rolls, no whispered mockery, just eyes wide open, minds catching up to a reality they hadn't known existed outside their insulated bubble. Jasmine watched, her daughter with a pride that radiated beyond politics, beyond title. When Tamia finished, the room erupted not in laughter, but in applause. Tentative at first, then building into something genuine. Mrs. Lockhart clapped too. Her hands slow and awkward, her face red with the kind of humility that comes from being so thoroughly and publicly corrected. Jasmine placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, leaning down just enough to be heard. Lesson delivered, she whispered. Tamia smiled, not for the class, not for the applause, but for herself, for the truth that could no longer be denied.